The agenda this week looked at both the justice system and the correctional system in Canada, examined chemicals of mutual concern in the Great Lakes, and sampled the debate over authenticity and food. The agenda's Week in Review begins with a look at whether smug liberals helped Donald Trump win.
There are disgusting, awful, horrible, racist, xenophobic, misogynist, crummy, even evil people at Trump rallies and supporting Donald Trump. And the fact that one of the failings in journalism was that so many reporters went to the rallies, interviewed those people, and said, this is the Trump coalition. Well, of course, it's not the Trump coalition. It's all those voters in Wisconsin that Hillary Clinton didn't even notice. She never even bothered to set foot in the state, who then gave the election to Donald Trump by voting for him. It's a whole range of issues, and it's difficult and complicated to separate out the extremists, the truly hate-driven types, from those who are simply confused and angry and upset and disenfranchised. But again, we have to go back to the reality of it. As you've already pointed out, Steve Bannon is in the White House, and there are a rash of racist acts that have taken place across the United States and here in Canada, even this morning here in Ottawa, that I don't believe are simply coincidental as a result of this man becoming president-elect.
Tell us about the Ottawa one.
A rabbi woke up this morning to find on her door a swastika and the word kike. And I tweeted the CBC report on this and said, this is what Mr. Trump has bequeathed us. And my feed is filled with people who are saying there's no connection whatsoever between the election of Donald Trump and what some stupid kid does on somebody's door in Ottawa. You don't think so?
There might be. What people say does matter. And this is one of the reasons why I agree with what people say about, at the moment, politics is theatre. Shame. But it seems like it is. But it's not always been that way, and there has been more consensus politics in the past. But it is important what you say. It does change what people do, and people do feel that they've got license to do things if they have, one of the most powerful men in the world who says things that are racist.
I don't take away from that, but there was swastika graffiti spray painted on people's doors and headstones before Trump became president-elect, and there will be after he is. How can you make the direct connection?
No, I think you're right. There has been and there will be. The question is, will there be more? And I believe there will be more.
I want to jump in just briefly.
And then Janice, yes.
Okay.
If we go back to that Daily Show clip with the guy with the crazy T-shirt, part of the problem, I think, when we call people deplorable, we're generalizing. I can make anybody look stupid, any one of us, on television. That's easy to do. The guy clearly didn't understand the joke. But I also say, perhaps in his defense, perhaps not, maybe he is a racist, maybe he's a down-in-the-wool, dyed-in-the-wool misogynist, but maybe he just really doesn't like Hillary Clinton and the Clintons. And he's protesting that. And the fact that the person that you dislike and are therefore vocally protesting, even if it's obscene what you're saying about them, doesn't necessarily mean you hate all women. Doesn't necessarily mean you hate all Jews.
But you know what?
It's easy for us to say that and tar everybody else who then step back and say, well, I'm not that person.
I get you, but you're not a Hillary Clinton fan, and you wouldn't wear that T-shirt in public. I know you well enough to know you wouldn't.
I don't wear many T-shirts like that. I find it hard to understand how people hate people. I really do. Like I can get incredibly angry with counselors on the floor of council or politicians for their policies, but that doesn't mean they're bad people. It means we disagree viscerally, but they're still human beings, and we can relate like that. But I think we've tarred far too many people far too quickly with labels like racist and misogynist and homophobic.
Janice and
So,
Stephen.
one of the other interesting moments during the campaign, and here I agree, with John, there were absolutely horrific things said during this campaign, and that's what debased the campaign, and that's what led to, I think, a universal disgust, frankly, with the state of politics. There was one of the interesting moments that we haven't talked about enough was when two very well-known older feminists came out and said to women, if you don't support Hillary Clinton, you're not us.
Gloria Steinem said that.
Gloria Steinem
Was that a
said
mistake?
it. Yeah, and one others. Yes, of course it's a mistake. Because what does that really say? It says, line up with us and rule out the possibility that you might have difficulty with Hillary Clinton on any number of issues, right? Just forget about all that. Either you play my game of identity politics or you're out. Now, tell me how that's a respectful comment about women who are supposed to have an independent mind, think it through, and vote for the candidate whose policies they support. That's the problem that we're not talking about. That's smug.
I mean, I just think the idea that the problem with the left was that we weren't polite enough, and we weren't, and that liberals were disrespectful. I mean, did you hear the opponent?
Yes.
I mean, also, I think we should state here clearly, like, Steve Bannon is not some guy at a rally. He's now in the White House. Yeah, he is a noted anti-Semite.
But
they are planning on setting up a religious database that is on their website today.
See, you're doing it again.
So this thing, well, no, because these are policy. This is actually, if you
but you're doing it again. You're focusing on Steve Bannon as if that's the issue. The issue that you should be focusing on is not the candidate. It's not Steve Bannon. It's why did millions of Americans vote for him?
Okay.
And why wouldn't the left or anybody of a reasonable, rational mind try to understand what their concerns were and then build a policy or a platform that would address those valid concerns?
Ghomeshi, which everybody talked about for quite a long time. Your view on how the judge handled that case?
I thought it was brilliant because I was living in fear that what he would do was go through, you know, the pro forma lip service to the I Believe Lucy crowd, the I Believe the Victims crowd, all the hashtag justice people, and say, you know, this doesn't mean I don't, you know, think, you just can imagine what he might have said. And he said none of that. What he said was these women weren't credible, and they certainly weren't.
The hashtag that you just referred to, there's a couple actually, been raped, never reported, or I Believe Women.
Yep.
Useful in the grand scheme of things?
Well,
Helpful to the cause?
I don't think there is a cause. I think the cause is getting a fair trial. And it certainly wasn't helpful to him getting a fair trial. He got a fair trial because the complainants imploded because he had a good lawyer and he had a good judge.
Okay, except that well, how do we want to put this here? There are too many women in this province and country who feel that for far too many years, the tendency has been to dismiss and or not believe their claims when they come forward saying they have been the victims of sexual assault, sexual violence, whatever. And this trial seems to have been wrapped up in all of that. And the fact that he skated at the end of the day left a lot of, I think it's fair to say, left a lot of women wondering whether or not there is such a thing as justice in this country for people who've been the victim of these kinds of crimes.
Sure, I understand.
Alleged crimes, let's call them.
I understand.
Is there something to that?
Well, I don't purport to tell people how to feel about things. I mean, of course, those are legitimate responses and all of that. I just don't share them. I mean, I think it's far more important, especially now, because an allegation of sexual assault or sexual misconduct of any kind is instantly and probably irreversibly ruinous. So you better be sure that the person you're accusing actually gets a fair trial, if only in the criminal courts, because he ain't going to get one in the public eye and on social media. He's not. I mean, where's Ghomeshi ever going to work again? Walmart he might get away with.
Do you know what? I've heard that said about so many people, and this is this tends to be a very forgiving culture that gives people second and third chances.
Well, I think that's good. I think people should get second and third chances. I don't have an issue with that, believe me. I think it's good, but not with sexual crimes. You give me one example. I mean, I can think of people in our business who have committed ethical breaches, who have, in some cases, the former Prime Minister, Brad Mulroney, taken 3 bags of cash after he left office. Surely that's not what we want. All of those people can recover. You can recover, but you really struggle to recover your reputation if you've been charged with sexual misconduct, even if you've been acquitted.
I was going to say, the President-elect of the United States hasn't been charged with anything, to the best of my knowledge, or maybe he has and it just hasn't happened yet. But there's been plenty of accusations of sexual assault there, and he seems to have come through it quite tickety-boo.
Well, I wouldn't, I don't expect that that will last. I mean, if there are actual allegations against him, criminal allegations, or even just social media
Well, there's an
allegations.
outstanding rape charge from California from many years ago that I'm not sure has been displayed. Anyway, you see what I'm saying here.
Yeah,
right?
no,
Anyway.
I don't disagree with you, but he's, as in so many ways, Donald Trump is an anomaly.
He is.
Most men don't recover.
If somebody ends up in segregation because the idea is we need you to improve your behavior and therefore we're punishing you, generally speaking, how often does that work?
It can be effective, and I can look back 20, 30 years ago, similarly to what you broached earlier, and say that it was more effective then. Administrative segregation did not occur as often or rarely 20 or 30 years ago. What I would say for most people who are not familiar, it's a jail within a jail. I would never advocate for this to be abolished. I believe it's an important tool that is required for consequences. And again, as Monty said, for a fight or for contraband or for various infractions, this is a very clear consequence for inmates. However, where we've really fallen into an issue here is with the administrative segregation. And this classification can apply for a variety of reasons. Somebody's afraid. Doesn't want to be in mainstream population, signs on for that. Other issues, compatibility issues, mental health issues. Sadly, again, the forensic hospitals were shut down in the 90s. Monty referred to that. A lot of these people are very frustrated and in decompensated states. There is not access to treatment or programming available. Certainly more so in provincial. It's minimal, non-existent. In federal, there is more resources for that.
While you're on that, what's the difference between federal or provincial segregation?
Well, there's a considerable difference. I mean, provincial system for one, I mean, a few things to clarify is provincial is always the entry point for any inmate. Anybody who ends up in federal begins in a provincial setting. That's where people are held while they're going through trial. It's only for people who are serving 2 years less a day or under. Federal system is a longer sentence. It's a transient nature in the provincial system, so there's a lot of people coming and going. Federal system is more static and I think more developed. There's more of a vested interest in the federal system. It allows for it to work more effectively. As a result, there's jobs, there's movement, there's a variety of things. You can access health care without a correctional officer.
Catherine, let me try this with you. I'm going to ask you to do a vast generalization here, but at what point when you're in segregation would the average prisoner start to experience mental health issues?
I think it very much depends on the atmosphere surrounding the person's placement in segregation. We notice, for example, in the federal side, there's disciplinary segregation, and then there's different types of administrative segregation. Lee mentioned people who are voluntarily in segregation. That's only about 20% of those that are in administrative segregation. They can do a little bit better because the atmosphere around their confinement tends to be fairly supportive. But if there's an atmosphere of harm, it doesn't take very long for people to have significant psychological and psychiatric implications for that. I can give you examples of a young man who really became suicidal within the first 5 days of his placement. But he came in and was subjected to some very harsh treatment because he had spit on a guard, and so his treatment reflected the extent to which the guards were angry with him for his assaultive behavior. And
what city did this happen in?
This happened in Kingston. It was in one of the maximum
Kingston?
facilities, yes.
Okay. And what happened to him?
He was, first of all, he didn't get any of the things that he's entitled to have, like a mattress and sheets and all this kind of stuff. So he was angry, and so he blocked his window, which is a very typical thing for men to do when they feel they have a legitimate grievance. They came with force, and they just sprayed pepper spray into his cell, and quite a bit of pepper spray, and he was having difficulty breathing, and pepper spray will affect your bronchial capacity. And he said, I need to be decontaminated, I can't breathe. And they said, too bad, basically. And so he broke the water system so that the sprinkler came down and just doused him. And he basically was left in a totally wet cell for about 2 or 3 days. And he saw his parole officer come down, and he said, I've got a razor blade, I'm going to slash myself if I don't get a shower, if I don't get, and she said, give me the razor blade, and he did. And subsequently, he said to the guards that he had reached a low point and he was going to commit suicide unless, and they said, well, go ahead. That would be one less person for us to look after.
And what happened?
His parole officer came down and said it would be a good idea if he apologized for having spit at the guard at his 5-day review. He did that, and they released him from segregation. But he had taken a pretty swift decline because of the conditions of his confinement.
Geraldine, as I suggested a moment ago, we're talking more about this lately, I think, because of Adam Capet's case. Could you, just for those who haven't been following it, tell us who he is and why he ended up in segregation?
Well, Adam Capet, he initially was in for minor charges, but while being housed in the Thunder Bay Correctional Center, there was an altercation and he was charged with first-degree murder, and that's how he actually ended up getting transferred over to the jail. In the jail, he was put in segregation, so 23 hours a day, plexiglass cell with lights. And it wasn't until Renew went through and was shown him that we actually got a bit of knowledge about what he had been going through. For over 1,500 days, he had been in administrative segregation, which I think is an important part to describe, is that he wasn't in segregation for the charge of first-degree murder. He was in segregation, and we don't know for sure what the reasoning behind it was because we haven't been able to get a hold of all the paperwork that allowed him to stay in for so long. But it would have been either for his safety or for the institution's safety or to conduct an investigation, and being that the altercation had happened at a different institution, the last one doesn't really make sense.
Interestingly enough, his case has become very public and very political. Interestingly enough, even the conservatives at Queen's Park have gone to bat for this guy, seeing that his treatment has been substandard. Does anybody know why he has been treated the way he has?
I don't think anyone knows specifically in that case. You're just seeing administrative segregation in both the provincial and the federal correction kind of become the go-to model for having to deal with prisoners. And a lot of it has been mentioned by other panelists today, where you're talking about warehousing, you're talking about a lack of mental health services. And when all of these things get combined in an institution, it can become really difficult to handle. And the problem now is that we're resulting with administrative segregation. We're going there first, rather than it being a last case scenario. So it's really across the country. There are hundreds of Adams across the country right now in segregation and long-term segregation. Where I'm at in Manitoba, they actually say that it's probably the highest rate of segregation in our provincial prisons, and it's followed quickly after by Saskatchewan. In the prairies, we have very bad rates of segregation, and it's just a situation where you are having so many prisoners that guards are unable to deal with it. And these aren't just regular, it's a lot of people think that everyone committed the crime, do your time, but a lot of these people have complex mental health needs. And those are also falling on our provincial and federal corrections system to deal with all of these things.
They've had studies. They say the studies show this is not dangerous. You okay with those studies?
So no, actually not. We don't have good assessment of the sum total of radionuclide threats to the Great Lakes, and that's been noted in studies out of the IJC since the 90s. We don't have collective monitoring because we haven't designated a chemical of mutual concern, and so we haven't started to assess where it falls in the list of priority threats. Right now, our standards, say for drinking water, allow people to consume drinking water with, for example, tritium at levels that are 360 to 700 times as high as we would any other toxic chemical in the Great Lakes. So the problem is that we're assessing these things against inadequate current standards. So we do need to take a good, fresh look at this question, and we need to look at the whole range of sites in the basin. So in that nomination that John was just mentioning, we had over 100 groups, both sides of the Canadian-US border, agree that we want the two governments to nominate this as a chemical of mutual concern and do that assessment in view of the very large number of operating plants, legacy waste sites, legacy mining sites, and legacy weapons sites that exist all around Lake Erie, Lake Huron, and Lake Ontario in particular.
Okay, we will consider some of that in just a second. I now want to go to Mark and find out what's your view on whether or not we have adequate studies in place that confirm that this is not a concern.
Yeah, I obviously don't think we do, because our organization, Lake Ontario Waterkeepers, signed on to the petition to have it included as a chemical of concern in the Great Lakes. And I remember, I think it was 2004 or 2006, Ontario actually held what was called the Ontario Drinking Water Advisory Committee process here in downtown Toronto, where 70 groups came and looked at things like tritium. And the current standard for drinking water in Canada is 7,000 becquerels per liter. The American standard, somewhere around 700. And
so they got tougher standards than we do.
Much more. And then you get to this provincial advisory committee, and the province really looks after drinking water. Out of that report, which CNSC and the industry was heard from, they recommended 10 to 20 becquerels per liter as the standard.
So even the Americans are too high.
And now, yeah, and yet here we are almost a decade later, and we still have the 7,000 becquerels per liter. And so when, and it makes it difficult and for all of our groups really to get a handle on why we're not going to the stricter standards, particularly on the Great Lakes where we drink the water, and why the industry is pushing back on even the very simple idea of really just doing proper monitoring, making it transparent, putting it on a chemical of concern so we can look at the future of the Great Lakes and what we need to do to protect it. Like in Bordeaux, where they're spending, and give them credit, $1 billion right now, sealing up and protecting the Lake Ontario from the waste around that community. That's
which you support.
Totally, and that's the biggest environmental cleanup in Canada going on right now. And so clearly there's a problem and there's a concern. I think it's time now just to take the next step and really look at what the damage has been done to the Great Lakes and what we need to do further.
Let me follow up with Michael on this.
Okay.
All right, we have two people here who are skeptics about the value of the studies that you say confirm that everything's fine. Why do you think the studies are fine when they clearly don't?
So clearly we differ on the drinking water standard. For one, we do monitor and require monitoring of the intakes of municipal water treatment plants adjacent to nuclear power plants. And the tritium concentrations are extremely low. They're in the order of background to sometimes as high as 15 becquerels per liter. And that's important because the WHO, the World Health Organization, Health Canada, the province of Ontario have all said 7,000 becquerels per liter is the appropriate standard. And that's based on science that comes from the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation.
So those who say 10 is better are what?
So I would say they've taken a different approach. And it's only this committee that has recommended this low value here in Ontario. They've recommended it about 8 years ago to the province of Ontario, and they haven't moved on this, and they're still considering the science. I would still like to add is the level in the United States, 740 is widely acknowledged as a math error from the 70s. They follow the same framework. However, there's no need for them to raise the number based on the science that the rest of the world would consider, because their industry, like ours, are meeting it. We do our own environmental monitoring independently of industry, and we publish this data on our website that clearly shows that the municipal water treatment plants immediately adjacent to these facilities is extremely low in terms of tritium.
Teresa.
So I just want to jump in on that. The Ontario Drinking Water Advisory Council was set up after Walkerton and consists of eminent scientists to advise the Minister of the Environment on drinking water
Remind
standards.
everybody, I mean, Walkerton's a long time ago already, so remind everybody.
Was the situation where the town of Walkerton's wells were poisoned by pathogens and 7 people died from drinking water.
And thousands more sickened.
2,500 were very ill.
Yeah.
So as a result of that, many things were put in place to protect sources of drinking water, barriers to protect drinking water. And one of the things was this council, which consists of scientists who advised the minister on drinking water standards. So they did a very thorough analysis based on a request by the minister after she received a request from Toronto's public health officer. And based on the science, they noted that radiological standards have been set in a certain way that is inconsistent with chemical standard setting. So chemical standard setting, we say, will allow for an excess cancer incidence, 1 in a million, whereas in the radiological standard setting, they're actually allowing for an excess cancer incidence, as I mentioned, at least 350 times higher, and an excess cancer death 70 times higher. So what ODWAC said, this committee, is that it's not appropriate to have drinking water where people's health is treated differently just because the substance is coming from a different industry.
I think by itself, authenticity can actually be quite a pernicious idea, because what it does is that it often conceives of culture as a sort of a static, hermetically sealed bubble. And if we say that you know we can't sort of mess with the things that are authentic, we're saying that we can't change culture. We can't, you know, as Jamie's saying, we can't experiment and be creative. I think that what changes the things slightly though is context, which is that if there were not a history of predominantly a Western majority taking things from, you know, their sort of colonies or countries that they've invaded or cultures that they feel superior to, and then not only taking those things but profiting from them, then I think that, you know, this kind of experimentation would be fine. It's the historical context in which it happens that I think not only draws people's ire, but it reproduces that historical context.
Well, let's do a little different example here, shall we? Gorvy, tell us about your restaurant.
Yeah, so, sorry, it's a taco restaurant. I do not claim the tacos are authentic in any way. I try to just respect the vehicle of a taco and put my take on it. And yeah, I am Indian, but I don't really know how to cook Indian food very well.
And you know how to cook tacos?
Yes.
So you're making tacos at your restaurant?
Yes.
And very well, from what I hear.
I hope so.
Popular restaurant.
Yeah.
How long you been at it?
2 years.
What did you used to do for a living?
I was a nuclear engineer.
I'm just going to let that sit in the ether for a second. Eh? You're a nuclear engineer
Yeah.
who left that line of work to open a restaurant that sells tacos.
Yeah, it was a childhood dream, so I thought
Welcome.
It was a childhood dream.
It's not unusual to get resumes like that.
Yeah, it's not at all.
Was there, your family background is Indian, as you said. Was there ever a moment when you thought, I really should, if I want to open a restaurant that serves Indian food?
A lot of people told me I should. A lot of people just assumed when I'm opening a restaurant, I would open an Indian one. But yeah, I'm not very good at cooking Indian food, and I am trying to make a business here, so I'm not going to sell Indian food just for the sake of selling Indian food.
Do you have people ever at the restaurant come up to you when they realize who's cooking their food saying, wait a second, you're not Hispanic at all?
Yeah, it happens a lot, but majority of the response has been positive to that. They are saying, oh, so you must have learned a lot about it, because some people who've traveled do see some elements of authenticity in the food that I make. And so they get excited about it and say, oh, it's nice that you're, you know, respecting a culture and bringing it to the east side of Toronto, which there aren't many taco restaurants there.
Okay, if not Indian food, why Mexican?
I just like tacos.
Okay. That's the big decision.
I think that's, yeah.
How do, okay, you say most of the reaction has been positive. For those who come to you and say, what are you doing cooking my tacos? You're not Mexican.
Yeah.
What's the response to that?
How I respond to
Yeah.
it? I say, well, I am really sorry if I'm offending anything to do with your culture, but that is not the intention whatsoever. I just, you know, I really love that part of Mexican culture, and so I wanted to do something with it myself.
Intent. She has no intent to offend. Surely that counts for something, doesn't it?
It counts for a lot, and in the words matter a great deal. It's also interesting to think that, you know, tacos themselves come from long histories of hybrid encounters. Tacos al pastor that you can find, well, the place right across the street from you guys has started selling tacos al pastor. That's a dish that comes to Mexico from Middle Eastern immigrants.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those conversations in their entirety at tvo.org and on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit tvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.